in 2015, the Gender Recognition Act was amended and eventually brought into law. So those two things happened, and one was very high profile and the other was sort of masked behind that. And I think those who are familiar with the Denton's playbook, as it were, will see that reference in that, as to how it's a recommended tactic, in fact, if you can sort of put a campaign behind another more high profile one. 2018, again, we had a public referendum on abortion rights, and that had been a long campaign going back from 2012 that culminated in a referendum in 2018. And legislation for abortion in 2019. So what's the connection between some of those? Well, this was the bill that was introduced in 2014, which eventually became law, and it was initiated in December 2014. And you can see here that an extract from that, the section G on the bottom, requires a certificate in writing of a medical practitioner certifying, and it shows the various requirements that must be forthcoming in order for a certificate to be eligible. That was at the first stage. At the next stage, in January and February 2015, that requirement is still there. So it's gone through a few stages in the Oireachtas, in the Houses of Parliament. It has been deliberated on. Now, if you look at the debates online, you'll see there were actually very little debate and very few even public representatives engaging in the discussion, but nevertheless, it went through a few stages, and you still see that section G is still there. And it wasn't until then they set up, there was a committee to look at some of the lobby groups who were looking for the removal of that. So they set up a select committee, and it was at that point that section G was removed in its entirety. And if you look at that in terms of the timeline, that was quite advanced and well into the whole process. And by July, that whole entire section had been removed from it. Now, anyone who's interested in that whole process can find it at that website domain there. You will actually find the whole timeline of the bill from its initiation to the end and all of the debates. So I suppose what I'm saying is that if you go back to the 2007 test case that set the conditions for this, even members of the public who would have been publicly following this, or who would have had an interest or a side interest, would have been following a particular story. And it was only in that last month that story changed as to what that legislation would look like. And it was during that period of time, as I say, when the marriage equality campaign was in its height, that these other deliberations were coming forward. So what was the response? Well, it really, I suppose, the legislation went relatively unnoticed by most people, as I say, in that background, until around about 2017, when women began to find that it was colliding with some of the stuff that was emerging in the abortion rights campaign and the repeal of the 8th Amendment. It was in full swing. And that was I suppose the first time that women began to realise that there may be an implication, because there was questions about the language that was going to be used in any subsequent legislation. But anybody who's even interested in looking to see how present the whole discussion was, if you do a confined Google search during that period, June 2014 to June 2015, you'll see the absence of any public debate or commentary on the Gender Recognition Bill or the Gender Recognition Act.